Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. So today we're going deep on WES credential evaluations, and we've got a ton of research on this.
Absolutely.
This is a big one for anyone thinking about studying abroad. You're trying to navigate a whole new world of education and figuring out how your qualifications measure up.
It's a bit of a puzzle, isn't it? I mean, education systems can be so different around the world. How do you explain to a university in, say, Canada or the US what your degree from India or Nigeria actually represents?
Right. It's like trying to compare apples and oranges sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's where WES comes in, I guess.
Yeah, WES or World Education Services. It's essentially a nonprofit that helps translate those international academic credentials into something that US and Canadian universities and employers can understand.
So it's kind of like an interpreter for your academic achievements, making sure everyone's speaking the same language.
Precisely. And it's interesting when you dig into the research, you see just how important these evaluations are. It's not just about getting into a university. It can impact visa approvals, job hunting, even professional licensing in certain fields.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I
It's
think
like your
over.
credentials are the key that unlocks all these doors.
Mm.
And speaking of unlocking doors, our sources have this great story about Simbarash, a mechanical engineer from Zimbabwe. He was actually able to launch his entire career in Canada thanks to his WES evaluation.
That's a perfect example. It really highlights the impact this can have. So let's talk about what a WES evaluation actually involves. Our sources point to two main types.
Okay.
You've got the document-by-document evaluation, which provides a general overview of your degree. That one's often used for immigration or employment. And then there's the course-by-course evaluation, which, as the name suggests, goes into more detail about each course you took, grades, credit hours, that kind of thing. And that's usually what universities want to see.
Got it. So you choose the type of evaluation based on what you're aiming for.
Right.
But I imagine this whole process can seem a bit overwhelming. Where do you even start if you're thinking, okay, I need a WES evaluation?
Well, the process itself is actually pretty straightforward, at least according to what we've gathered.
Okay.
First things first, you head over to the WES website and create an account, the usual. Then you select the specific evaluation type you need.
Easy enough. But then comes the paperwork, right?
Uh-huh. Well, yeah. You can't escape paperwork entirely.
Yeah.
The next step is all about gathering your academic documents. Transcripts, degree certificate, mark sheets, anything and everything that shows your academic journey.
And this is where things can get tricky, right?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most common mistakes people make is submitting unofficial documents or not having their transcripts sent directly from their institution. Those little details can cause huge delays.
It's like showing up for a passport photo with a selfie you took in your bathroom.
Yeah,
It's not going to
no.
fly. So once you've got all your ducks in a row, what happens next?
Right. So once you have all the required documents, you pay the WEC, which can range from $160 to $220 depending on the type of evaluation and the processing time. You can choose standard processing, which takes about 7 to 10 business days, or opt for expedited service if you're in a rush.
Okay, so not too bad, especially as you plan ahead. But speaking of planning, there's always a chance that things don't go exactly as smoothly as you'd hoped. What are some common challenges people face during this process?
Well, delays are definitely a common issue. And as we mentioned before, those incorrect or incomplete documents are usually the main culprits. Double check, triple check everything, make sure it's all correct and sent directly from the source.
Right, you don't want to be scrambling to get your transcripts resent at the last minute. But what if there's an issue with the actual evaluation? Like, what if someone feels like their qualifications weren't accurately represented?
That's where communication comes in. WES actually encourages applicants to reach out to their support team if they believe there are any inaccuracies. You can provide additional evidence or clarify details about your education system.
So being organized, double-checking everything, and knowing who to contact if things go sideways, that seems like solid advice. Any other pro tips you come across in our research that could make this whole process smoother?
One thing that really stands out is using the WES document checklist. They have specific checklists for different countries, which can be super helpful to make sure you haven't missed anything important.
Okay, that's a great tip. Anything about trends?
Mm-hmm.
We're always looking for that future is now kind of insight.
Well, one of the most interesting trends is the move toward digital credential evaluation. You know how we mentioned those delays caused by sending physical documents? Well, it turns out 80% of documents submitted to WES are now digital, which really streamlines the entire process.
80%. That's huge. Digital definitely seems to be the way to go for efficiency and security. Plus, there's less chance of things getting lost or damaged in the mail.
Absolutely. It's fascinating to see how technology is transforming this aspect of international education. And speaking of transformations,
Here's where it gets really interesting, right? I know our sources mentioned something about blockchain and credential evaluation.
Hmm.
Is this the part where we geek out about the future? Blockchain. That's some next level stuff, I have to admit. It's a bit outside my comfort zone. Could you break it down for us and maybe connect it back to how it could impact someone listening who wants to study abroad?
Sure. It is pretty cutting edge. So imagine a world where all your academic achievements are permanently and securely recorded on a digital ledger. No more paper transcripts to worry about, no more wondering if a document is legitimate. That's the potential of blockchain.
Hmm.
It's a decentralized system, so you would actually have control over your credentials and could share them instantly with anyone in the world.
So no more waiting weeks for transcripts to arrive by snail mail. Sign
Yeah.
me up. But let's step back for a second. We've talked about the technical side of things, but what about the human element? Our sources highlight this company called LetzStudy, which seems to be helping a lot of students navigate the WES process successfully.
LetzStudy is fascinating. They offer personalized support, which can be invaluable when you're dealing with something as complex as international credential evaluation. They helped this student, Priya, who had her heart set on attending Kellogg School of Management. Turns out she had unknowingly submitted incomplete academic records to WES.
Ouch, that's got to be stressful. I can't imagine going through all that effort only to hit a roadblock because of a paperwork issue.
It happens more often than you think. But that's where LetzStudy came in. They identified the missing pieces, worked with Priya's university to get the correct transcripts, and resubmitted everything to WES. Priya's evaluation got approved, and she ended up getting into Kellogg.
That's a great example of how having expert guidance can make all the difference. It's not just about knowing the steps, it's about having someone in your corner who understands the nuances and can advocate for you.
Exactly. And Priya's story isn't unique. Our research mentions several other success stories. There's Rahul, who wanted to study in Canada, and Arjun, who had his sights set on Australia. They all faced different challenges, but ultimately achieved their goals with the help of LetzStudy.
It seems like they're a real lifeline for students who might feel overwhelmed by the process. So let's say you've submitted your application. Your documents are all in order, you paid your fees, and you're anxiously tracking your application online. What happens once that evaluation is complete?
Once the evaluation is done, WES sends the official report directly to the universities or institutions you've specified. You can also request additional copies if you need them for other purposes.
Okay, so that's the traditional route. But with all these advancements in digital credential evaluation like we discussed earlier, I'm curious about how things might change in the future. Our sources hint at some interesting trends. What's caught your eye?
Well, that 80% statistic about digital documents we talked about, that's not just a random number. It signifies a fundamental shift. Digital credential evaluation is about making the process more efficient, more secure, and more transparent. And as this trend gains momentum, we could see some exciting developments in the future.
More efficient, secure, and transparent. Those are all good things. But what does that actually look like in practice? What could this mean for someone listening who's just starting their journey toward studying abroad?
Think about it this way. Right now, the process can be quite fragmented. You have different institutions, different countries, different evaluation systems. But with digital credentials and blockchain technology, we could see a move towards a more unified system. Imagine a world where your academic achievements are seamlessly recognized and verified across borders.
So instead of having to go through a separate evaluation process for each country you're applying to, you could potentially have a single digital credential that's accepted globally.
Precisely. It would streamline the application process, reduce costs, and empower students to showcase their qualifications on a global stage. And with blockchain, those credentials would be tamper-proof and instantly verifiable, eliminating concerns about fraudulent documents.
It's like the ultimate passport for international education.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's where blockchain really shines. It's not just about convenience, it's about building trust and transparency into the system.
Absolutely. For students who might come from less well-known institutions or countries where the education system isn't as readily understood internationally, this kind of technology could be a game changer. It levels the playing field and ensures everyone's credentials are assessed fairly.
That's an important point. It's about creating opportunities and breaking down barriers. But even with all these exciting advancements, I imagine there will still be challenges to navigate. What are some potential roadblocks or issues that students might encounter in this evolving landscape of credential evaluation?
Well, one challenge could be access to technology. Not everyone has equal access to the internet or the resources needed to manage digital credentials effectively. So ensuring inclusivity and bridging the digital divide will be crucial.
That's a valid concern. Digital access is something we often take for granted, but it's a huge barrier for many people around the world. And what about the institutions themselves? Are universities and employers ready to embrace this kind of digital transformation?
That's another key consideration. It takes time for institutions to adapt and integrate new technologies into their processes. There will likely be a period of transition as the world moves towards a more digital approach to credential evaluation.
So while the future looks bright, it's important for students to be aware of these potential challenges and to stay informed about the evolving landscape. Are there any other emerging trends or developments in the world of credential evaluation that we should have on our radar? It feels like we're on the verge of a major shift in how we think about credentials, almost like we're moving from a paper-based world to a digital one. What else is out there on the horizon? Anything that's particularly caught your eye?
One thing that's gaining traction is the concept of micro-credentials. Instead of just looking at traditional degrees, there's a growing interest in recognizing smaller units of learning, like online courses, workshops, or even projects you've completed.
So it's like acknowledging that learning happens everywhere, not just within the walls of a university. It makes sense, especially with the rise of online learning and all these different ways people are acquiring skills these days.
Exactly. And micro-credentials could be a way for students to showcase those specific skills and competencies to potential employers or universities. It's about painting a more comprehensive picture of your abilities.
That's a really interesting development, especially for someone who might have a more non-traditional educational background or who's looking to upskill in a specific area. It's about recognizing that learning is a lifelong journey, not just something you do for a few years in your early 20s.
I think that's a key takeaway from all of this. The world of education and credentialing is becoming more dynamic and flexible. It's exciting, but it can also be a bit overwhelming to keep up with all the changes.
No kidding. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the nuts and bolts of WES evaluations to the potential of blockchain and the rise of micro-credentials.
Hmm.
It's a lot to digest, but I hope it's empowered you as our listener to navigate this landscape with a little more confidence.
I agree. The most important thing is to stay curious and informed. Do your research, ask questions, and don't be afraid to seek guidance when you need it. Resources like LetzStudy are out there to help you along the way.
That's great advice. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help. And remember, even though this whole process might seem daunting at first, it's ultimately about pursuing your dreams and opening up a world of possibilities. So keep exploring, keep learning, and who knows, maybe you'll be one of those inspiring success stories we'll be talking about in a future deep dive.
I love that. Wishing you all the best on your journey.
And until next time, happy learning.